My name is Wright. I am the voice of reason. I speak for the Last Crusade.
To defeat the enemy, one must first know the enemy and come to grips with the enemy. To dam the stream of damnation issuing from the enemy, we must find the fountainhead of fake news, false visions, and faithless art the enemy uses to mesmerize, to depress, and to sedate a bewildered world. Let us begin with a short diagnosis. The current phase of the eternal war between heaven and hell takes the form of a culture war gripping the West. The great civilizations of the East have adopted one or the other of the banners of Western thought or Western heresy. China is Marxist rather than Confucian. India follows British forms of law. Japan and South Korea adopt democratic free market policies. Hence, the outcome for the East depends on the West. In the West, Europe has abandoned God and committed slow suicide. Russia has abandoned godlessness and shows sign of a return to her old strength. The Jews, as is their sad habit since biblical times, have also abandoned God and now whore after other gods, the secular gods of political correctness, anti-life nonsense, and moral filth. As ever, God preserves a remnant of the Orthodox and practicing Jews, a tithe from whom the next generation will be built. In all this, no hope of triumph over the darkness remains, save perhaps here in America. If we prevail here, Europe and Israel may yet be saved. If not, the leftists will feed them feet first into the wood chipper of the jihad. In America, the riots, bombings, assassinations, and mass shootings by Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and the jihadists and other terror groups employed by the left or by the FBI currently are an adjunct to the culture war meant to produce turmoil, discontent, and above all, fear. In effect, at the present moment, the terrorism is meant to produce psychological rather than military victory, to reduce the will of civilization to resist, since overcoming our strength by direct means is, in this generation, impossible for them. Instead, they must rot and destroy from within. In America, the political system is on its deathbed, but it has not yet died. A transfusion in the form of Donald Trump, a man who is half mountebank and half left-wing himself, comes as a surprise so miraculous that the enemy has been driven into a mad frenzy by the shock, and they gnaw their shield rims, frothing at the mouth and raving. Nonetheless, the treason of the Democratic establishment, in terms of fixing the nomination votes against Bernie Sanders, and the treason of the GOP establishment, in terms of hindering and delaying the repeal of Obamacare and dithering on tax reform, should be as great a shock to all men of goodwill of any party. Those who doubted that a core of one party, one world government, one Caesar globalists have been running the leadership of both parties via a permanent donor class of the super-rich should now eat crow, admit their former blindness, and gird up their loins. I include myself in that crow-eating. I voted for John McCain out of party loyalty when he ran for president, and I was repaid for my loyalty by his treason when he arose from his deathbed to vote down repealing Obamacare. Your political leaders whom you trusted are working for the enemy. They wanted your votes, but did not want to do the things needed to win your votes honestly, that is, by adopting policies and laws favorable to your interests. What they did instead was to alarm you and tell you that truly horrible, hideous people threatening slavery and instant death, men of greed, craving to trample your rights, were menacing you with immense menace, and only your vote, thrown to the candidate we select for you, can save you from the boogeyman. What they did instead was divide the nation, set brother against brother, white against black, men against women, rich against poor, and all against Christ. Even the American war between the states, an issue as entirely dead as the wars between Norman and Saxon, was prodded from its grave long enough to set Union against Confederate once again, except this time the role of the Union was being played by real fascists from Antifa, and the role of the Confederates waving the Dixie flag was being played by pretend fascist cosplayers in Nazi uniforms. Trump is the one source of victory in the battles this season, and one after another victory has been granted him by heaven. Why such an unlikely leader was selected for this role, I leave to wiser heads and deeper hearts to speculate. All I know is, and speaking only for myself, I love the man. He alone, of all politicians who has ever promised anything I supported, also seems to know where the enemy power rests and where its strongholds are hidden, and at those he strikes without mercy, with but the grin of a happy warrior. He alone, practically without aid, has unmasked the true depravity and dishonesty of the news. The term fake news arose to prominence on his lips, and the days when mine was the only voice I ever heard denouncing the news as the enemy have passed. Now mine is merely one voice in the choir. Yet Trump is mortal and will fail, or will be assassinated by the leftists as they grow more violent and more desperate. Trump is not the messianic savior for the right any more than Obama was the messianic savior for the left. Neither man is significant in and of himself. Both are merely symbols and figureheads of the great cultural shifts currently underway. Obama was a living symbol of the sickness of political correctness, the anti-American race-baiting globalism and arrogance of the Christ-hating perverts, dunderhead intellectuals, and secular Satanists who dominate our cultural elite. Trump is a living symbol of all the hardworking Americans sick and tired of political correctness, sick and tired of Alice in Wonderland thinking, tired of fake news that lionizes villains and vilifies heroes, sick of the moral sickness of same-sex marriage, sick of the psychological sickness of men who castrate themselves and demand we call them women, weary of lost jobs, lost opportunities, and lost liberties. Left and right are outdated as labels for anything in current politics. Or rather, the meaning of the dividing line has changed. Whatever it once stood for, the left now stands for the elite, ruled by an international plutocracy and an unelected bureaucracy. Whatever it once stood for, the right now stands for populism, a combination of nationalism and protectionism and patriotism. The left still yearns for radical change and violent revolution, but still has erotic daydreams about race riots, burning cities, and the guillotine, but no longer cares for the working man's utopia that socialism once promised. The right still regards society as an organism, which can only change through healthy growth, in keeping with its roots, not as a machine to be fixed by social engineering, or improved by treating people as cogs. The left sees man as a cog or a dumb animal who needs a trainer, locked in an endless Darwinian struggle of rich against poor, white against black, male against female, oppressor against victim. A baby is just a clump of cells to them and can be killed when convenient. A man is just his skin color to them, and his skin color is his uniform and defines his government-granted privileges, rights, and sets the proper range of his allowed opinions. The right sees man as made in the image and likeness of God, possessed of natural, inalienable rights, and that all men are brothers. Such is the diagnosis. Such is the state of the world, which, for better or worse, depends on the fate of the West, which, for better or worse, depends on the state of American politics, American culture, American fidelity, and all of which, ultimately, depend on the collective honesty of individual Americans. It depends on you. It depends on your willingness, when ordered into silence, instead to speak the truth. Truth is kryptonite to them. Even from the very first, newspeak, political correctness, and the art of praising falsehoods as virtuous was an essential part of leftist doctrine. The practice began when Marx coined the term capitalism to refer to the behavior of free men in the free market, claiming the only thing that ever freed men from economic systems of oppression was an economic system of oppression. And he coined the term wage slave to refer to the only method of employing labor that is not slavery, but is the direct opposite of slavery. The practice of calling everything by its exact opposite in an Alice in Wonderland looking-glass Jabberwocky fashion cannot flourish unless three things are done. First, for Jabberwocky to flourish, the public dialogue in the press and mass media must be corrupted until the majority of people grow accustomed to words having no meaning, but instead carry nothing but a sense of hot emotion, fear or contempt or hate. Instead of reasoned debate between grown men of sober experience, we hear nothing but the shrieking of hysterical schoolgirls. The core of the agora is the courtesy and mutual respect which free men of equal rank hold for each other. Courtesy is drowned in clownishness or screams of hate. Respect is buried beneath accusations of oppression and victimization. Equality is dismissed by the very simple prospect of pretending that life is unfair because not all men are equal in luck or good fortune, equal in height or income or intellectual gifts. Therefore, it means nothing to have equality in the eyes of the law, which is the only kind of equality law can promise or grant. This approach is so stupid and so easily rebutted that it is a source of continual astonishment to me that anyone is deceived by it. News and reports about the factual state of the world have to be replaced by a narrative, or rather a vision, of a world where toxic males of the white race, bent on Christian theocracy, establish a patriarchy of oppression meant to trample minorities, women, and sexual deviants. Control of the press allows the enemy to falsify facts. Second, for Jabberwocky to flourish, liberal education, that is, the education in the process of reasoning and the experience of all the foundational thought, philosophy, and literature of the West, must be done away with. The core of education is love of wisdom, also called philosophy. Only a false model of the universe, one that is useless as a tool of reason to reach the truth, can be permitted to flourish. Modernism must murder philosophy for leftism to flourish. The Western canon of thought, the theological and philosophical, which alone can explain and sustain our way of life and our cherished institutions, must be replaced with a sick, selfish vision, or rather, a spiritual blindness in which God is dead, and each man creates his own world, his own moral code, and establishes the meaning of life by his own decree. This is the philosophy that kills philosophy, and it is called nihilism, and it can be described in a word as the worship of falsehood for the sake of falsehood. Control of education allows the enemy to falsify truth. And third, for Jabberwocky to flourish, the moral core of civilization must be rotted from within, a soft corruption to sap the strength which starts from the bowl and moves to the branches and twigs. The core of civilization is the family, and the core of the family is the role of mother and wife. The core of civilization is therefore erotic love. The core is romance. This requires a moment of explanation. The strong inclinations of love and romance tend to bind couples into union, and the truth of religion to bind such unions into permanence and make them sacred. The most effective way, perhaps the only way, to rot this ancient and beloved institution is not through the corruption of law, but through the corruption of tastes. Corruption of tastes is not done through the press nor through the schools, but through the public circus, through the popular entertainment, songs, stories, and shows. If every television show, movie, and comic book portrays fathers as fatuous and fat-headed, figures of comedy rather than breadwinners, and if sexual pleasure out of wedlock is portrayed as the sole admirable outlet of pent-up romantic passions, then motherhood can be portrayed as undesirable, and the strongest urges in the female breast can be deflected into sterile and self-destructive channels. Once women are convinced to adopt self-destructive habits, harlotry, temporary sterility, casual degradation into sex objects, and to chase after men rather than lure them in, the appeal of marriage is destroyed. Even the mention of it falls by the wayside. Once a pregnant girl is convinced to kill her child in the womb, or even to voice applause for such an act, the deep and selfless love between mother and child, which women throughout all time were celebrated and famed for, is subverted, perverted, and begins to die. Again, once a woman is convinced that the pleasure of the sex act, not the deeper meaning of the unity of soul and flesh between man and mate, is the sole meaning of the sex act, no act of sterile perversion, not even the abomination of sodomy or pederasty, can be seen as forbidden. Sterile sex is selfish and meant to be selfish, because the possibility of new life is closed off. Selfishness and motherhood, however, are mutually exclusive. As a matter of logic, selfishness and motherhood are mutually exclusive. Women are told to seek love and romance in the one place it can never be found, in casual hookups and filthy harlotry. They find nothing but heartbreak and frustration. There's nothing else to find. 9 out of 10 divorces in the modern day are sought by the wife, who regards the husband not as lord and master, but as paycheck. Meanwhile, in the arts, almost by their very nature, emphasize the surface features of a romance, the beauty of women and the bravery of men, but rarely praise the long-term and sacramental nature of erotic love. Dante is rare among poets in that he depicts a platonic hierarchy of love, leading from romantic love to divine love. Now, be not deceived on this point. Of late, the arts, even such humble and popular works as comic books, are fully devoted to propaganda directed against motherhood and marriage. Every depiction of a female shows her in a masculine role, and every man in a girlish role, usually a figure of low comedy. Perversion is depicted as wholesome and hale, even brave. Family life is routinely portrayed as a source of turmoil and oppression. Control of the arts and entertainment allows the enemy to falsify love, to banish it, and to pervert it. With these three institutions, the press, the schools, and the entertainment industry, firmly in their control, facts become fake, truth becomes fiction, love becomes self-love. The grand moral vision on which Western civilization is based is then replaced by a fog of wicked nonsense, on which nothing can be erected except for perhaps the gallows of suicide. But what is to be noted here is how vulnerable these institutions are to public pressure. The thing is not to be done overnight, as no empire falls overnight, and to be sure the enemy will resort to violence when they sense power slipping from their talons, and so there will be bloodshed before the empire of lies is overthrown. Despite this, the press cannot endure without patrons buying their wares. The entertainment industry is an industry which requires your voluntary patronage and support to continue to spread their venom and propaganda. Schools and colleges do not exist without the voluntary donations of alumni and victims foolishly entrusting their children to them, or without public funds, which the public can vote away as soon as the public gathers the political will to do so. The enemy was not born ruling these institutions. Very slowly, one diversity hire at a time, one riot, one student rebellion, one Hollywood communist at a time, the enemy inched their way into positions of influence. They think in the long term, because theirs is a mystical vision of utopia on earth, and themselves as gods, defining good and evil to serve their whim. If we oppose them merely on political grounds, that is to say, on practical grounds of what is minimally needed to preserve peace and order, we will fail. Politics is practical, the art of the possible, and politics thinks in the short term. We must oppose them as a crusade, and draw the sword against the sons of their father, the devil. Not in a year, not in a generation, not in a century is the battle to be concluded. When this battle is concluded, the war will continue and other battles in other realms be fought. This is a war of visions, a battle of dreams. We can start by starving and mocking their fake news, boycott, protest, and harass their vile arts, and stop sending impressionable children to the lobotomy centers called college. And yet this will only be the opening salvo of a long, monstrous, and monotonous war. The center of power of the enemy is not the political sphere. When they lose elections, they only lose a finger. This does not cut off the head. The Democrat Party is a servant of the leftists in the press, not the masters. The source of the rot are the three areas upstream of politics: the press, the academy, and the arts. This is how they spread their vision, but these are not their sole strengths, nor sole strongholds. But the beginning of the long war is in prayer and fasting.